This conference will now be recorded.
Hello guys. So today we will focus on using punctuation and subordinate clauses. As you know that's very important to focus on the writing punctuation part, because in IGCSE exam, if you will use the wrong punctuation, you may use the points. So focus on today's lesson. What is a clause? A clause is a group of words that includes a subject and a verb. A main clause is a clause that makes sense of its own and can also exist in a sentence on its own. But if we will talk about uh, independent clause and subordinate clause, so independent clause makes sense of its own because it's a complete thought, it's a full sentence. For example, I went to town, or it was red. But subordinate clause supports the independent clause. The opening words of subordinate clauses show that they are dependent on the independent clause. So that's why it's called a dependent clause. For example, after the storm cleared, or because he didn't like chocolate, and so on. The subordinate clause can come at various points in a sentence. You might use one at the front of the sentence, at the end, or in the middle. For example, a fronted adverbial can be a type of subordinate clause. For example, like a bullet speeding through the air, comma, he runs through the door. So focus on the punctuation, as I said before. You might want to use one at the end of a sentence. She went straight home after school because she needed an early tea. Sometimes they even come at the middle of sentences. For example, my brother Richard, comma, who lives in Australia, comma, is coming home for Christmas. When to use a comma? Sometimes you will need to use a comma to mark where your subordinate clause is. Here are some general rules to help you know when to use commas. So guys, if the subordinate clause starts the sentence, use a comma after it. If it ends the sentence, do not use a comma. For example, before we go swimming, comma, we have to go to school. Or we have to go to school, no comma, before we go swimming. So as I said before, subordinate clause start the sentence, use a comma after it. Or it ends, do not use a comma. So if the sentence ends with the subordinate clause, don't use the comma before it. So guys, if the subordinate clause is adding additional information in the middle of your sentence, put commas before and after it. For example, tomorrow morning, comma, when the clock strikes 9, comma, school will begin. So as I said before, it shows additional information in the middle of the sentence, so it proceeds by commas. So if you could put parentheses around your clause, it needs commas as well. So focus on the given examples, and you may take notes as well. Conjunctions. So what do you think conjunctions are? Why do we use them? So conjunctions are used to start subordinate clauses. Here is a collection of conjunctions, so you can see them below. You can use the conjunctions to make subordinate clauses for this sentence. Do you think so? She walked for an hour. While, you may continue the sentence. Which, you may continue the sentence. Until, so that, or so others. So before, after, just as. relative clauses. Defining relative clauses are used to add essential information to a sentence. The clause goes immediately after the noun it describes. This is the man who sold me the car. So it comes after the noun that describes. Remember, we use relative pronouns who, that for people, which, that for objects. So we can use that for both, for people and for objects. But who we use only for people, so we cannot use who for objects. Where is always used for places. Whose we use to talk about possessions. When and that we use for a time. That we use for time when we show time preceding or something. For example, from that time. That exactly, we use that here. And that also used for reason as well. So that we can use in different positions, for people, for objects, for a time, and for a reason. For a reason, we also use why. But whom we use for objects, pronouns that shows people. Examples. He is the man who owns this car, or he is the man that owns this car. So both is possible here. This is the house where I was born. The girl whose party I went to fond me. Okay, so next slide. In the next slide, we will talk about relative clause that will used in different clauses. For example, we can leave out. It means we can drop out who, which, that, whose when the clause is the object of a sentence. Object of a sentence, but not the subject, because we keep relative clauses when it shows the subject of the sentence. But in that case, when the clause is the object, we omit, we don't use, we leave out the relative clauses. For example, the doctor I spoke to is the object of a sentence. That's why we don't need to use who, which, that, those, and so others. Told me not to worry. The man I saw, what did I do? I saw, so that one is object, was very rude, so we omit the relative clauses. The last sentence. Mr. Smith is the teacher my son likes best. So again the same. But we can't leave the relative pronoun, as I said before, in a defining relative clause that refers to a subject. The doctor who treated me told me not to worry. That's the dog that attacked my children. So, in defining relative clauses, why and when, unlike where can be omitted. For example, I'd like to know the reason he decided not to come, or I'd like to know the reason why he decided not to come. So in both situations, the sentence is correct, with why or without why. But she always had wanted to go to a place where she could speak her native tongue. So this one is exception. Please remember and focus on. Non-defining relative clause. We use non-defining relative clause to add non-essential information to a sentence. Additional, it means non-essential. So the clause goes immediately after the noun it describes. If we remove the relative clause, the sentence would still make sense of its own. For example, Pedro, who is my brother? So who is my brother is non-essential. Additional information lives in auxiliary. We use commas to separate a no-defining clause from the rest of the sentence. For example, you see relative pronouns. Santander, comma, where I live, comma again, because it's non-essential, informative, it one just like additional one is used, is a beautiful city. My father, who is 64, this one is additional information, is going to retire soon. For example, my father is going to retire soon is the right sentence, as we use who is 64 as an additional information. So we use commas on both sides. So remember this one. So when we use additional information, so non-essential part of a sentence, if it's used in the middle of a sentence, so it proceeds with commas. We can't leave out the relative pronoun in non-defining relative clauses. For example, John, who is English, helped me write the essay. So again, the same situation here is going. So guys, next slide is about practicing. So we have discussed the grammar form, how they use, and so now is practice time, like now is an activity time. So open your copybooks, please practice. Complete the sentences with a suitable relative pronoun if necessary. Maybe you don't need them. So that's why when you do a test, please read the sentence till the end, focus on the meaning, and then try to find the answer. So complete the sentences in your copybooks. This is the first activity. So guys, next one is coming. This one again, complete the sentences with a suitable relative pronoun if necessary again. So guys, I hope you like the lesson, and I want you to practice a lot, and I want you to write additional 20 more sentences in your copybooks. See you later, guys.